Welcome, Robin Lee Carlson. I am so honored that you're joining us today. Um, for folks who haven't had a chance um, to kind of get a little bit into Robin's brain, she is a longtime journaler, nature observer, um, and with a real interest in fire. And you did just an amazing project. One of the things I tried to get kids to do, and I was writing the book with Emily Lagren on how to teach nature journaling, is that if you can find a place that you can come back to again and again and again, you get this sense of place, and you see the changes over time. But you kind of took that to a higher level, um, following a fire and the recovery of a system post burn, both in your practice of journaling and what you learned ecologically there, is really hopeful and inspiring. And we today we're going to get a chance to go sort of travel into your brain and sort of see a little bit about your process. I want to encourage everybody to, sketch along with Robin, um, and just sort of notice how she thinks about things, notice how she frames things, notice how she approaches things. It's not that there's anybody has the right way of doing things, but I think you'll see some approaches that are really different that might be easily folded into your practice. Or even if they're not easily folded in, if they were to be folded into your practice, would open up some doors for discovery. Robin, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me here, Jack. And before I get started on sort of talking about the project and leading into the drawing, I first off just want to thank you so much for believing that this project should be a book and helping me get started on that path and being such an unfailing supporter of it the entire time. I am so deeply grateful for that, and I want to start off with that important
Yeah.
word of thanks.
Well, when we get a chance to look through each other's journals, and you are bowled over by just the beauty of somebody's thoughts and process. I got a chance to look through some of Robin's fire journals, and and begged and pleaded that I could bring this over to Heyday Books to see if they would turn it into a book. And they took a look at it, and they was like, um, "Oh yeah, oh yeah," and the book is beautiful. The book is absolutely beautiful. Your Cold Canyon Fire Journals, um, new book from Heyday Press. There it is. Um, and so you get a little bit of the experience of kind of going through Robin's original journals, because all of these are the pictures that were in the field observing these things, and there's also narrative description that takes you through the experiences that you've had. But it's all based on the attention that comes from spending deep time in a place. And I just can't wait to get a chance to sort of I think maybe to see like how this comes about. Like you see these books, and it's just like it feels like this. How would you even start? Well, you start by going out and paying attention, and let's kind of drop into your brain and see what that looks like.
Perfect. So I'll do just a really quick introduction to what the project was, so people have a little bit of background. So I sort of, as I was transitioning into a science illustration career, out of more data focused and stream restoration focused work, I really wanted to find a project that would let me sort of develop this growing body of work to show how I thought uh, what I thought could be a really important and valuable method of communication about what's happening in the natural world. And that is not finished science illustrations, but using the pages of a sketchbook to communicate much more immediately and directly what I'm seeing in the world in a way that can help convey the sort of emotional impact of that to viewers. And so I was looking around for places that would be great to follow over time. And then a reserve very near my home burned in 2015 in the Rag Fire. And there's a hiking trail in that reserve. It's a University of California Natural Reserve, but it's open to the public. And so I thought this is an amazing opportunity to follow really rapid ecological change in a place where I know I have access, and also in a place where other people have access to. And it's a really beloved local hiking spot. So I knew people would have that emotional connection to the place. And so I thought, perfect. It's 25 minutes from my home. I can go there regularly. I decided to aim for once a month to go and see what I could see. And so that was how the whole thing started. And what I'm going to do now is go through a series of photos that sort of go through the process of what I learned, and sort of just, instead of just telling you about it, I will draw and talk to you about it along the way. But I also, we've got plenty of time, and I can talk while I draw. So I would very much like this to be a conversation the entire time. So people should definitely feel free to start asking questions right off the bat. And and if we can do questions
Yeah.
from the beginning, that's perfect.
Yeah, and so drop those into the chat, everybody. We'll be monitoring that chat, and that will be really useful. I just also just getting started. Just I'm noting that you to make this work, you intentionally with your schedule created a routine that allowed these patterns to emerge for you. And so, very often, if we're with my journaling, I'm kind of spur of the moment, like, oh, I've got a moment, I'm going to go do something. But this is what can happen if you're really planning ahead and bookmarking these certain spots in your calendar where you're going to go out, get the next stage, get the next stage, and get the next stage. That itself is a really useful, practical idea. So here, 30 seconds into it, and bam, she's just dropped the first one on us. I'm going to turn off my screen so we can make your screen bigger, because we're going to get to take a look down at Robin's drawing surface here.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to add one more thing to that that helpful hint for anyone who is wanting to do a project like this, which is setting a schedule is good, but also not feeling completely bound by that schedule is important too, because especially in the beginning, it was a little bit stressful to think, shoot, it's almost the end of the month. I haven't been this month. And realizing that I could relax and go a couple times in 1 month. And if I miss a month, it's okay. So I think that's important too, for the longevity of the project, to not feel like if you get outside of your schedule that you have perhaps messed it up and you have to stop.
Yeah, that happens with people with their diets all the time, doesn't it? People are like, I'm going to go on a diet, and then, but then you go out and there's pizza, and you have more pizza than you thought you would, and then people say, oh, I messed up my pizza plan, and so I'm going to just go off this whole thing. So with your journaling, if you're kind of out of the routine for a little bit, you can just gently pull yourself back into it. So this is some good self-care thought. I love that, Robin. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So where I want to start, these are admittedly blurry photos, but they're very important to me because they are from my very first visit to the reserve after the first fire in 2015. That's the other quick note, is that I started this in 2015 after a fire then, and I did it for 5 years, and then the reserve burned again in 2020. So it's been a super interesting experiment, and I'll talk about it more later, in making observations after a fire that had been 30 years after the fire before it. So a relatively healthy interval for the chaparral parts of the habitat that dominate there. But then it burned again after 5 years, which is not what chaparral has evolved with. So it certainly introduced all sorts of other questions about how what's happening in this reserve fits into the larger picture of wildfire in the Western US and truly all the other habitats that are like our habitats that are also experiencing fire in similar ways across the world. So this was after the 2015 fire. I visited a few months after the fire. The reserve was closed to the public, but they were offering tours. And so I got to go in on a tour and take a first look at what things looked like. And this this really became sort of the first important symbol and image to me of what was going on there after the fire. So this is a chemise plant that the above ground parts of it were burned or otherwise killed by heat in the fire, and it just about immediately, I mean, truly within the first, because I saw photos that were in the newspaper locally, um, started sending up these shoots, you know, really just within the first month or so after the fire. And so
Oh,
that's sort of, yeah, go ahead.
Robin, quick question. Is it possible on the screen to maybe make the photo a little bit smaller and make your drawing surface zone a little bit larger? Because for us to be able to see, yeah, see what's
That
going
may,
on your paper there.
I
And
think that may be the limitation. I think that's as big as my phone screen interacting with the
okay,
thing showing it on the computer is gonna get. That did make it a little bit bigger though. And actually here, you know what I can do? I can bring the phone down a little closer.
so for friends at home, notice that Robin has just got a really simple low-tech system for getting us all this information. You can use your phone to 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 present. Um, is that with are you using camo?
I am using on the phone, I'm using what's it called? True Visage so that I don't have any of the camera setting
Okay,
things showing. And then I'm just using QuickTime on my computer um, to show it on my screen. And it's true, it does give it's sort of small of me drawing, but it also allows, especially if people are trying to draw along, it does allow seeing my
yeah,
reference image really well. So that's the trade-off I have been I've been using so far.
cool. So for anybody who's teaching from their own home, you set up these same sorts of systems. And I always kind of am getting out my non-photo blue pencil and doing these little preliminary drawings, and you just dive right in with this broad, almost brush pen.
Yeah, so I am trying to, with these demonstrations, do as close a facsimile at my desk on a screen as I can to what I would be doing in the field. And I don't always use this kind. One of the things that isn't exactly the same as the field. I do use a brush pen like this in the field, some, but not exclusively. But
Okay.
because of the limitations of seeing things on a screen, I do really, really love it for um, demonstrations online because I think it makes it easier for everyone to see. And it also is, I think, just a nice thing to watch people use too because
Mhm.
of the beautiful variable line. That same thing makes it, if I'm trying to draw really fast in the field, I find this hard to draw super fast with, and so I don't always use it in the field. But I am, for this demonstration, just like in the field, um, primarily using ink first. I don't use pencil because I think it's very important to capture um, the sort of immediacy of what I'm observing then without feeling like I can or want to try to fix anything or change it. I want to capture things as I'm seeing them and as I'm experiencing them, and that will mean that they are less than perfect and that there will be mistakes in them. But I think that's worth it and even desirable in helping communicate the the sort of the actual experience that I'm having right then. I think that the
Look at
the
that
mistakes
variable
help.
line you get. That's just by different amounts of pressure on that. So I'm seeing that you're doing the stuff that's in the foreground first, those little lace-like leaves, and then dropping the background in behind it. That order of operation makes a lot of sense.
And I had to, it was a long, slow process of learning, and, and I still have to remind myself all the time that things don't have to completely connect up, that you can let your background be slightly separate from your foreground with some white space in between. And I even could leave more of it here, but something that I do have to keep reminding myself of all the time, that I can let that separation be there so that you don't lose the more delicate things in the foreground here. But I also try to keep in mind what was most important to me about this scene in the first place, which is the delicacy of these brand new chemise sprouts against the much harsher um, and sort of the potentially sort of upsetting and worrying. I mean, it's hard not to have that visceral response to seeing things that are burned and think, oh my goodness,
Hmm. Hmm.
something bad happened here. And so this contrast of the burned branches that do cause that, that first emotional reaction, with then these really delicate signs of life that are proof that, before these sprouts came up right after the fire, it looked like that chemise was completely dead. It had been burned, it had been charred, looks dead, it looks like it's finished. But of course it's not. Underground, that
Hmm.
chemise is completely fine. um, and that led to sort of one of the most important revelations in this process, which is that what we think is the most important part of a plant is not what the plant thinks is the most important part of itself. What we see is what's above ground. We rarely see what's below ground. So of course we think the leaves, the flowers, the branches, those are what that's the important part of the plant, but it's not. At least plants that have evolved with fire. It's their underground system that's the important part. They can let everything up above ground go, and they've got what they need underground in the form of stored nutrients and water to sprout up again, and they're completely fine. So that was not something I really even thought about at first, but something that slowly dawned on me, that's a completely different perspective, and one that's really important to have when you're looking at an immediately, I mean, a landscape that has just burned. um, I absolutely still have the response of, oh my goodness, that looks terrible. And then I have to remind myself, but it's not terrible. And there's a lot that's alive and a lot that's going on under the surface
Mm.
that I can't
Mm.
see.
That itself is such a powerful, powerful lesson. Also, just I'm noticing that there's so you're seeing contrast between the old burned and the new life. You're also adding that contrast in with the very strokes of your brush. So I'm noticing that you've got just these delicate lines in there in those plants, and then that contrasts with, oh wow, you just go right over those zones. So not trying to go leaf by leaf, you're showing me that there's this sort of broad zone of that. That is also, I love the way that on drawing those leaves, notice that some of them have the leaf itself is dark. You're kind of getting the sense that there are some leaves that are more in shadow than in others, and that comes out just in the brushwork that you use to put in those leaves.
Yeah, and I love that. I sometimes I do that sort of thing on purpose, and sometimes I don't. And the beautiful thing about using a brush pen and using watercolor loosely is that it will do things for you and bring out things in your image that you didn't even necessarily know that you were doing. But that's sort of the magic of letting your art supplies sort of have their own life and live on their own, because they absolutely contribute their own things to your image.
Mm. So nice. You're so approaching this with your first dropping in the light values while that's still wet, blending in some deeper shades of green. And I now get this sense of just light bouncing around in those little plants. Lovely effect there.
Yeah, and it's something that again, it's a practical thing because if you're working in the field, it's very helpful to be able to work quickly and capture some of what you're seeing in front of you in a way that you kind of recognize it on the page, and it will help you remember that experience later. But um, it's also that there was a point there. Usually, I can talk and draw. Hopefully, it'll come back to me in just a minute. Uh, but um, but so I think it's also sort of important that I always have to keep reminding myself I don't have to color everything. I can leave some of it in color and some of it not. That this working quickly, this might have been my point. I don't know. That working quickly is practical because it lets you keep moving down the trail and sketch more things as well. But it
Hmm.
also, uh, in many ways, sort of helps helps the artwork be more effective than it might have been if you allowed yourself to truly draw every detail or truly fill in every color, or even spend a huge amount of time trying to match the perfect colors. And there's one more thing that I did want to put into this to remember it because it's something that is important to me and jumped out to me in that image. And my watercolor may be a little wet, but that's okay. I love the where the stems are starting to have just a little bit of red in
Mm.
them. And so I'm going to put that in here, and it may sort of dissolve away because there's still a lot of water on the page. But I did want to remember that because that was
Red
another
plays with
important
green
thing.
so nicely, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, just a little bits of red. If you ever put greens down and you feel it's too vibrant, just a few little reds or magentas dancing in there. I also just appreciate this wet in wet approach. Like I get all stressed out with if, one color bleeds into the next. No, I didn't want you over there. You're supposed to be ground. But the watercolor, when handled wet and wet, you get these beautiful blends. So look at that sort of beautiful zone where the a little bit of the plant color came into a little bit of the ground color.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
and
that's,
you just let it be, you let it do its thing, and that's just gorgeous.
yeah, it's my favorite thing. I mean, I didn't have anything to do with that. I was absolutely thinking that I was gonna let my uh, brush with the brown of the ground touch that so that that might happen. But of course, you never know. Sometimes that doesn't do exactly what you want it to. But I love that it has that glow, which just helps highlight the colors
Hmm.
above.
Hmm.
And I think it's something that also I still always have to remind myself what I'm doing in the field is not the same as what I might do if I was sitting at my desk trying to do something more accurately. And then what I learn over and over again is when I let things do their own thing on the page, I always end up with artwork that I like so much better because it
Mm.
is so much more immediate and takes me right back to where I was. And At least from my experience in looking at other people's field sketches and informal sketches and loose sketches, I get so much more of a sense of that person and their experience from those than I ever would from a finished illustration of theirs. And so I just assume that it works the same way with my art too, and that this is my best communication tool. And so that was very much the point of this project.
Mm. Yeah, and you mentioned this earlier, but I just want to highlight it again. You don't feel pressure to paint the whole thing. We're just letting the brushwork in the bird branches and that high contrast just speak for itself. That live part is getting watercolor, and that also just adds more contrast. It's so visually interesting this way than rather feeling like I have to somehow completing a drawing is having the same treatment of paint and pen over the entire thing. You let that go entirely and you get this. That's lovely.
And I
That's
think it
it's fun.
turns viewing it into a process more because if there are unfinished parts, it sort of you sort of come into the image um, by sort of being able to explore the entire process. So you see the ink lines that were the initial drawing, and then you see the paint that was added. And so then, as you see that as a viewer, you're sort of brought into the location as I was drawing it, and into the drawing itself because you sort of see how it was constructed.
Yeah. And the way you applied the darker green over that lighter green, it wasn't a random thing. I'm thinking now, looking at this, that you were intentionally putting more of the darker green towards the base of the things, or towards the base of clumps. And so now when I look at it, I've got this where the sunlight is hitting it more directly. I've got that part kind of glowing warm and then cooling into those shadow zones. That really
Yeah.
works for me. So
Yeah. So I
you're not
do.
just blotching.
I definitely do. Even in the looseness, try to keep in mind giving things, sort of a three-dimensional form. And so I'm looking for, where the lighter, where the darker areas are. And even if I'm not doing that in any sort of careful, accurate way, it does help a lot just to have that general idea of, okay, well, I definitely see it's a little bit bluer and greener down at the base. It's yellower at the top. And I can give some three-dimensionality to the sketch. And I also, I'm not sure this is a great example of it, but in the texture of the burned branches too, I'm often trying to put my heavier, darker, or closer together lines towards the shadow side. And
Mm-hmm.
I sort
Mm-hmm.
of did that. I didn't
Oh,
completely,
yeah,
because
no,
you
I see that on the right-hand sides, and also towards the base, or your lines are heavier, where it's going to be more shaded. And but you also then let those lighter lines go, kind of giving you the texture of those ripples. But the thing
yeah,
that also is jumping out to me is that you're intentionally leaving, you're not having to treat the entire branch. You're letting some places on that, say, second branch from the right, how tempting it would be to do the line treatment over the whole thing, but by leaving that area on the left-hand side of that open, I feel that there's light striking that branch.
yeah, yeah. It's why I love brush pens, because you can do so much with just black ink, and with just what you do with where you put the lines and how fat they are. So the next thing, the thing that we're probably almost familiar with about wildfires is that you can usually expect really abundant wildflowers in the few years after a fire. And so that was definitely the next step. I visited the reserve a couple times in the winter, and then it was spring, and there absolutely were the abundant wildflowers that I had been expecting. And I was super excited. I, had been reading about fire following flowers that only emerge after wildfires, and had been hoping that there might be some at Cold Canyon that only appeared after fire. And it did turn out that there's a bunch of flowers there that are way more abundant after fire. But there's only one that I'm aware of that only shows up after fire. And so it's that delicate, creamy yellow flower in the center of the image, and it's called whispering bells. And in most of the places that it grows, it requires fire. Not absolutely all of them, but in most places, its seeds wait underground until there's a fire. They are waiting for the cue of the nitrogen in the smoke to tell them that it's time to germinate.
Oh, the nitrogen in the smoke
Yes,
stimulates. Oh, crazy.
yes, exactly. It's so cool. And so fire dependent plants have a bunch of different cues. It's not always nitrogen that tells seeds that are waiting for fire to germinate, like in whispering bells. It can be heat. Um, it can be heat. Maybe it can be other components of the smoke too, but it definitely can be several different cues that tell flowers that it's time to grow. And the reason that they have evolved to do this is because they are counting on the fact that the fire has opened up huge amounts of sunlight to be hitting the ground in places that it didn't in the mature ecosystem. And so they can count on all of this light. And then also, because the trees and the shrubs have been, um, some of them have been killed, they've been reduced in size, their leaves have been burned off. There's less water being sucked out of the ground too. So it's not only light, it's also water resources that have opened up for these wildflowers.
Hey, I'm gonna. Uh, I just sort of notice I'm in a trance right now, watching your brush dance around to these different flowers. You're intentionally getting these at these different angles that they are. And are you using negative shapes to kind of block in all these crazy different angles? What's kind of
Oh, that would be clever, but no, not particularly. I'm just sort of I'm grabbing as many of so well, first thing is I find this flower to be incredibly difficult to draw. I would say I have not yet drawn whispering bells in a way that I'm completely satisfied with. It these delicate little flowers and the patterns that they grow in on the plant, I for some reason find very hard to draw. And so no, I will try to remember that and look at negative space
uh,
in the
and
future because that might help. But no, I'm just grabbing as many of them as I can, and then and I don't always do this. Usually I sort of work from one spot, usually down if I'm drawing flowers and I'm drawing the stems around the same time. I can't really say why I'm doing these this way. Usually I would have done some stems by now. So I think I'm going to start putting some of those in.
but so you're dropping in the flowers first, and then connecting down. Sort of your brain is visualizing where the major stem is going to go, with these little lines going down towards that spot. Um, for doing those little flowers themselves, though,
Yeah.
it really helps that you've intentionally got them at all these goofy, wacky little angles. So each one of those is a little kind of puzzle box of shapes connecting together.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the reasons they're so hard to draw. And some of it is that they maybe the way the flowers all hang and the way that they're structured, I it's very hard to generalize them and draw a clump of them in a way that I might with others flowers that have a bunch of little blossoms. They're sort of all individuals on this plant and they want to be treated that way. And so if I'm trying to draw things perhaps more speedily in the field, they sort of defy that any kind of abstracting treatment that I might do with something else. And then these ridiculously crazy leaves also insists that you spend some time with them.
But we
But I
also
love
have another example of maybe you're using this sort of front to back approach again, where you first are doing the stuff that was in the foreground, those flowers that are in front of you, and then those stems retreat behind them. You're then drawing those stems in after you've placed those foreground flowers.
yes, yeah, definitely. That it it is very much a conscious way of making sure that I don't lose the tiny details of things.
All right, so my little artsy jaw just kind of hit the floor. I always am having to kind of frame in flowers and kind of get the overall structure first. And you're just kind of going in with all these crazy petals, and then at the end of the day, it's making a little cone there in these poppies.
Yeah, and so much of that is is accepting that it's not going to necessarily look the way you want it to. Is being okay with however it turns out each time, because the more you do it, the more you get familiar with what a poppy looks like and you'll do it more correctly. But especially when I'm drawing a flower for the first time, I think it's so important to sort of feel my way around it and let my first impression be my first impression rather than really trying to completely understand and get it structure exactly right the first time.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, so much of it is being okay with things that were maybe not exactly the way that you were hoping they were going to look, because it also builds to a bigger picture. So even if I look at any one of these poppies and think, well, that's not a great poppy, it's still it adds up. And it was the experience that I had then. And the more I draw puppies, the more they turn out the way I want them to. Although
Yeah.
I still can't say that that's the whispering bell that I love.
Well, the and it's going to be also you're setting yourself up for such a joyful experience when you get to drop in your orange on those poppies, the
I know.
oranges and the yellows. All right,
Yes.
that's going to be so much fun. Yeah, getting to kind of drop color in on something like that is it's just like this little Christmas present.
Yes, it is. I'll actually put a couple more in.
So you had 5 years of change out at this site, and then you just happened to then another fire rolls through. So on the first one, you didn't get any before and you didn't get the before and after, but then another fire event comes through, and it's as if you set yourself up to get the before.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And because I had at that point the relationship with the reserve, I was able to go in and take a look around
Mm.
um, right after the fire, which I had not done the first time, and so it was fantastic to be able to go before, before anything much, although things start respreading almost immediately, but still before much was growing at all, and really be able to poke around and look for some of the signs of what the fire had done and where it was, and how it had affected, looking for how leaves had curled in the heat of the fire, looking for how rocks had flaked apart, um, again in the heat of the fire, sort of seeing if I could read any signs of the fire's passage on the angles of char, on tree trunks, things that I just didn't get there soon enough the first time. And also getting a better sense of, um, truly what things show up first of all.
Mhm.
So another reason that whispering bells are hard is that creamy color is so beautiful on the flower, and it's very hard to represent on the page. And so I usually do that by putting a little yellow. I was a little heavy with this yellow, so that it would show up on the screen, especially, and then making sure I leave some white too, behind, to at least give some of the idea of that beautiful
Isn't it
creamy
hard to
color.
leave those whites?
Oh yes, it is very hard not to color everything in.
It's so much more effective when you kind of you challenge yourself to leave some of those whites. And I'm seeing your palette is 8 colors. Is there another palette that's off to the side, or is do you run around with these 8 colors?
I do, and it's actually at least one color too many, but there was space for that orange, even though I never use it, as you can see. Um,
Oh,
but especially in the field, I certainly use more when I'm at home, but I really don't like to use um, a ton of colors. I mean, again, especially in the field, because I want to be traveling as light as possible. I don't want to be thinking about my art supplies at all. I want them to be extremely portable, and um, I definitely also appreciate the quick and easy unity that you get from a limited palette too, and having to mix. And I do try to do as much mixing on the page as I can too, for some of the same reasons that you saw in that first painting, because it really helps with the liveliness of the image to let the paint pigments interact on the page.
yes.
And
And
there's something that some of my thought process in doing this. There's a really beautiful shadow cast by that whispering bell. You can see it. This is on a slope, um, going up to the left, and you can see that whispering bell shadow going up the slope. So I'm going to attempt to do a shadow in the background here. And my guess is, because of the way that that whispering bell is detailed, it's not going to be obvious what it is, but I'm going to try anyway, because it was important to me, and because then I would have in my sketchbook a record of that thing that I saw, that stood out to me, and that seemed like an important thing to capture, even if I anyone else looking at it would have no idea what the blob in the background was.
So so more important than what the final product is, what is on that page, is that you're seeing something in the landscape here that is significant to you. And did you just mix that black?
Yeah, it's purple. It's just blue and red.
Blue and red.
Well, I mixed it where I had some green. So to be fair,
Yeah.
it's dirtier than just blue and red. But I'm a strong believer in dirty
Oh.
paint to a certain extent. I mean, yes, it's very easy to get, to have everything turn out muddy. But especially with a limited palette, you can sort
Hmm.
of let things merge with each other more than you might think that you would.
So, but then, so more important than having a page that is somebody else looks at that says, "I understand this," and it's a pretty picture. You're trying to capture things. So in this place, the sun was probably beating down strong on your back, and that the shadows felt significant and important to you. And you're trying to capture the experience rather than create a page that will be pretty for somebody else.
Yes, absolutely. And most of the time, I mean, I do not. I mean, I definitely don't spend time thinking about composing my page at all. I definitely let where things end up on the page be much more driven just by the order that I observed things and how I thought that the pieces of the ecosystem that I was observing fit together rather than trying to
Hmm.
make a pretty page. But in my experience, especially, um, sort of when you are sort of accurately representing, when you are honestly representing your own experience in a place, the pages turn out beautiful. Even, I mean, and in ways that you wouldn't have designed them to be. So I don't, it wouldn't be obvious to me looking at this if I hadn't drawn it that that was meant to be a shadow. But I remember, so this always is meaningful to
Hmm.
me. It maybe doesn't convey all of that information to someone else, but if I am going to use it as a communication tool, I can label it. I can say that's a shadow, and then that
Oh.
helps with the communication. And then also, I didn't love my whispering bell. I didn't love my poppies. I don't love my shadow, but I really like this. I mean, just I think one of the biggest processes of sort of the path in developing as an artist is truly not about developing better skills. It's about loving what you yourself have put on the page. That is not to say that developing skills isn't important and isn't going to happen, but the thing that evolved for me over time making images was simply being able to really love and appreciate what I myself had made. And so this whole thing actually I think is beautiful, even if it doesn't do what I thought it did, and even if no particular element of it is something that I love. And I think that's sort of one of the most important things that I want to share with other people is the evolution of yourself as an artist is much, much more with appreciating and seeing what is there in your art rather than focusing on, developing specific skills.
So yeah, so you're both appreciating what is there before you, and then respecting and enjoying whatever came out on that page. You're not getting stressed out about technically rendering something and beating yourself up about that. This is about just being present with the whispering bells and being present with your process on the page and being gentle with that. I love that. I really, really love that. So if folks are watching this at home on a recorded video, pause it here, rewind it just a couple of minutes, and just listen to that thought again because I think that that's a really beautiful, useful thought for our journaling and also for our lives.
So the next thing um, that that sort of in the process of both me understanding what happens after fire and then just sort of in the larger picture of fire ecology. So what we've seen so far is that things that look dead aren't dead. We've seen that there's a whole bunch of plants that think that the recently burned landscape is the best landscape, that that is the pinnacle of ecological succession. That is what everything nature is driving towards. It's driving towards this burned landscape because that is their best time. That is when they're abundant. That is when they are thriving the most. So what that means, of course, is if there's tons of flowers, there's going to be all of the other species that rely on those flowers that also think the burned landscape is pretty wonderful. So I, for these demonstrations, I am relying on what I've been able to take pictures of, and I'm not an experienced photographer, so I don't get very good pictures of anything that moves. So there's always tons of bees out in recently burned landscapes because of the flowers, and this is really probably the only series of pictures of bees that are worth drawing from a photo. So I think what's nice about this, especially in giving an idea of sketching in the field process, is they're not perfect photos. You can't see all the details, which you also can't see if you're drawing. I mean, if you're following this bee around trying to draw it out in the wild either. So this sort of helps recreate that process of trying to capture this beautiful California carpenter bee. And I do just appreciate carpenter bees a lot because they hang out in the same general vicinity for a long time. They're big, so they're great for following around and trying to draw.
Just a
So,
little hint of that green iridescence on them.
yes, and I mean, they're also they're
Yeah.
just
And
gorgeous.
are we seeing a big yellow pollen basket on its
Yes,
back leg there?
yes, huge.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's been collecting
it's
this
it
morning.
right. It has been busy. It has been successful, but it wasn't done yet. So, and it's right now what it was investigating was a nice patch of Pacific pea vine. That's what that flower is. So drawing this here, I'm obviously taking more time with it than I would be able to in the field, but it is still fuzzy and it's kind of nice practice for drawing these guys in the field too, because again, so much of it is the practice and familiarity with, you know, the particular species that are in this area. If you're observing one area um, over time, you will get more and more familiar with what lives there and what they look like, and that will help enormously when you're trying to draw moving things or when you're trying to draw rapidly as you're hiking through your area trying to see as much as you can. um and so with this one I absolutely am going to enjoy
The
dark,
Robin Carlson shadows coming our way.
and it helps. And
Oh,
the important thing is remembering to leave lots of white. More white, it's a really good rule of thumb. If you're going for this high contrast um, brush pen or with anything else that you're using, this high contrast sort of style, leaving more white than you see in front of you helps a lot in not losing your drawing into the murk. Um,
that sounds like a lesson learned the hard way.
oh, absolutely. I have so many dark blobs. So I definitely also want to at least get a little bit of this flower that she's sticking her head into. And I love how the light is just glowing through
Hmm.
the petals.
It's really interesting. Here's a bee in flight. I just rolled my chair back away from the screen and squinted at it, and it still reads as a little hovering bee. Um, and I think
Yes.
that's because of the white that you left.
Yeah, and because there are just some characteristic things, I mean, our brains recognize there's that bee shape, that hovering bee, so that if we spot it out of the corner of our eye, um, if we, I want to do one more in the interest of time. I'm trying to pick which one. It's very hard. Bees are so satisfying. I guess I'll do the bottom right one. Um, and and being able to sort of know and replicate those characteristic shapes helps a lot for drawing quickly in the field too. So that even if you only saw something for, for just a second as it flew by you, if you have some sort of experience in thinking about what it was that told you as it flew by you what it was, um, then you can, you're in a much better position to from memory, um, quickly get that shape on your page, even if it is not. I mean, it won't have all of the details of what you saw. I mean, already I'm drawing way more details than I would be able to in the field, but often it's just a few really quick lines that can convey that, yeah, absolutely, that was a bee.
Hmm. And this is so neat. Like you're just flick flick with the brush there. Part of my brain would say, but oh, but there's an antenna on the other side, so you have to draw that one in. It's further away. It's at a different angle. It's less visible,
But it
and
is
you just
visible. I didn't even think I see. I didn't draw it because I didn't see it. But now that you say that, I think I do see it.
but just kind of going with what you're seeing. You're going with what your experience is rather than a mental image of what it should be.
Yeah, so much of it is learning how much you can leave out of things and have it still be completely recognizable as as the thing that you are drawing. Uh, and that's all I'm going to do. I wanted to, especially since there was all of this green grass in the spring behind it, I did want to give some idea of that texture in the background too.
Mhm.
So the bee herself, I will do very little to. I'm absolutely going to highlight that pollen basket, and give it a little very, I mean, so much of what I do when I'm doing color quickly is figure out how to pick whatever the main color is that I'm doing for something, but then at least one other little color to drop in somewhere to give it shape. So that pollen basket, I want it to have some little bit of three dimensionality, and so I do that by adding another color in to then do whatever it wants to in the water. And so then I also, there's that beautiful reddish brown tinge in the wings. So I put just, ooh, that's not very reddish. Put just a little bit of that.
But then still leaving that white sparkle.
Yes, it's very hard. I've done so many wings where I thought, shoot, if only I left a little more white. Uh, and then
Ah.
I'm gonna actually do just a little bit around the edges of the, and I wouldn't necessarily, or rather, if I caught myself in time, I might not color both of the bees. I do like leaving things undone, but when I don't catch myself, I definitely have a tendency to color everything in. So then the flowers too, I want to put just the, see if I can find a little purple already here. Just the faintest bit of color on them so I can get an idea of those nice shadows. And since I'm painting everything, I'll do that too. And then in this one especially, I am gonna go and put in the super green background.
Oh, and that's how you're going to get that contrast of those. Look at her mixing these greens. Oh, you're dangerous. and that's how we get those flowers then become bright white, and the glisten on these little wings and bodies becomes bright because of that contrast with that background color. The wing just sparkles now. Oh, Robin.
And I think that one would have gotten even more out of this if one of the bees wasn't painted. But that is one of those things that you recognize after you've done it.
And so, but also I'm noticing here you're thinking to yourself, oh, there's something I wish I did differently. You're
Hmm.
not filled with angst about that, and that's just maybe something for the next one. And you
Yes.
handle those moments of, oh, perhaps I should have done that. Oh, and it actually is really pretty and cool and interesting where the pollen basket goes into the grass.
Hmm.
Right. And I'm a lot of my drawings are much more about like I have this feeling that I'm supposed to control all that. And I would try to not let that happen. Or if it did start to happen, I thought, oh, how can I hide that? But it is it's really fun. It's really lovely. This is such an education for me, just watching you joyfully play with this.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to let go.
Oh, oh, what fun. What fun. Um, this I it is it's always inspiring to watch you work. I feel lucky to have worked with you in the field and been able to look over your shoulder when we're playing with fire. Um, and the this is absolutely inspirational. And also, notice how many of us would be tempted to do the same handling of darks and yellows all the way through that background. And Robin has it denser on the right-hand side and then turning to a more of a wash off to the left. And that is this is one of these, you really kind of get the less is more. Um, a lot of the lessons that come from brush painting, um, the brush paintings that I've seen from the in the Asian Art Museum, I see, also I learned that from watching you play with these shapes. Robin, thank you so much for coming to share your approach, the joy that you have in this. Um, I, uh, I want to encourage everybody to get yourself a copy of the Cold Canyon Fire Journals. Maybe we can put that link up again. Um, and after seeing this, I think our group is going to be filled with questions for you. Um,
Good.
and Robin, we're just so honored that you came and joined us. I'm going to have to depart from the conversation now. Um, but Avea is going to be continuing here to facilitate the discussion and conversation and question and answer. So if folks want to ask a question, you can just use the raise hand function, or we'll also be looking for you in the gallery view. Oh, look
And
at
I'm going to
that!
keep drawing too. So I will
You're
answer
gonna keep.
questions and draw at the same time. So
That's
thank you
great.
so much, Jack, for again, for all of your support for all of this.
Oh,
I'm so
Robin,
grateful.
I'm honored to be your colleague.
Uh, as am I.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
all our friends out there, will see you. I will see you again soon. But we're going to hang out here. We're going to paint a little bit more with Robin Lee Carlson, and we're going to have some crazy fun with this juvenile skink. Also, just sort of thinking of youth and age here. So, yeah, you get the blue tail on the youngsters, but we also see some young leaves of the poison oak growing up there.
Yeah.
It'll be neat to see what you do with that sort of similar hasp of color down the back of the skink and those poison oak leaves over there. Well, Robin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And thank you, Robin. This is wonderful. I've been watching the comments in the chat, and we're all mesmerized. So
Thank you.
watching how you do this. Jasmine had a question
Great.
about what colors do you choose for your 8 color palette?
Yeah. So I definitely do not have specific names, but I can give the general philosophy because I am definitely not wedded to actual specific pigments. But a coolish red here. Sorry, let me show this. So I have a coolish red. It's the stark one here. I have a slightly warm yellow. I don't like using a super cool yellow, so it's a slightly warm yellow. There's a it's definitely an ultramarine blue. Um, some sort of a green that I almost never use by itself, but mix in with other things that's really handy to have when I want a brighter, fresher green. I usually don't use it by itself. I usually use it with some yellow. Um, and then sienna or umberish brown. I don't really care what, but it's great for mixing. A yellow ochre of some sort of a turquoisey color. I have used a bunch of different ones, and it's they're all different. It's nice to have any of them, but I do like this especially for greens. It makes mixing it with yellow. I love the bluey. I just love the quality of that green for a lot of foliage. And then the orange is really not important because it's really only there to take up space. So it's really only 7 colors that are critical to me.
Wonderful. And I wrote down the colors that you'd mentioned into the chat.
Oh, thank you.
We also had a question about, Kay says that they love the fluidity and variation in line that you get with the brush pen. And so what kind and size is it?
Oh, yeah. So this is, if you want to start with brush pen, the one that I'm using right now is absolutely the place to start. It's the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen. And it just has it has a really wonderful fine point. It's not an animal hair tip. It's a fiber. I don't mean fiber. It's a hair tip, but it's a synthetic hair tip, and it makes the best finest point that I've come across in any of these refillable brush pens. And then also Pentel. It comes with permanent ink, waterproof ink. To begin with, and Pentel sells cartridges of that waterproof ink. So it's a great place to start if you want to do brush pen and watercolor together, or even if you don't, because it definitely has the best point on its tip of any that I've used. If you are interested in experimenting, Kuretake also makes a ton of different brush pens, and theirs are lovely too. But I definitely recommend the Pentel pen the most.
That's excellent, especially your note there about watercolor, because I'm sure a lot of us have had the experience where we draw something and then we watercolor over it afterwards. Oh, sorry, I meant waterproofing, and we watercolor over it afterwards, and then of course all of the ink of the pen itself gets mixed in. So that's awesome to know that one is waterproof, so that way it won't mix with the watercolors that you put on afterwards. And how long do you have to let it dry? Does it dry right away?
So yeah, so you can see from my paintings that it does not take that long. The thicker and fatter the lines that you've made with it, of course, the longer it'll take. And I certainly have had ink run into my drawings from painting on them too soon, but it does dry awfully quickly. And if you're using it in the field, especially if you're outdoors, it will dry even faster. So I just want to point out that if you look carefully, you can see the second hind leg of the skink tucked under its body. It's sitting in a very uncomfortable looking position, but it was fine because I saw it run away. It just took me a while to realize what was going on when I looked at this photo that I'd taken after the fact.
It is a very cute skink.
It's a ridiculously cute skink, and it let me get, I mean, fence lizards let me get close and take their picture all the time, but skinks don't usually. So maybe it wasn't doing that well. Maybe there was a reason that it was holding so still, but it moved like it was fine after I was done. So the nice thing about stripy things is that you can use their stripes to help show the shape that their body's making. So it's really nice that the stripes help show the curves and how the body twists here. And it's easy, and I think I am already falling into that trap. It's really easy to get fussy, especially this ended up being a pretty small drawing, fussy, and I'm drawing all those stripes and I really don't need to. But now that I've done it, I definitely am gonna sort of keep using them as a way of showing shape, and also it sort of gives an idea of texture too.
Ooh, I like how right now you're putting the little texture marks right on the edge of that curve, because that's where the eye is drawn to, because the stripe along it will suggest that three-dimensionality. And so then having the texture marks right there is such a great way of just indicating that and drawing the eye without it being overwhelming at all, but just natural.
Yeah, that boy, eyes on lizard heads. Lizard heads are really hard. I have a lot of lizard heads in my sketchbooks or lizards in general, that definitely did not turn out the way that I was hoping to. So lizards are a great way to practice letting go of things turning out perfectly, at least for me.
I can relate to that. I think I can relate to that too. So we have a question about fire, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, please.
So we have a question from Susan of, in an area that you expect will burn in the future, do you have any suggestions for aspects to pay attention to now in the before stage?
Ooh, that is such an excellent question. Yeah, and we can probably treat many of the places around us as places that may potentially burn in the future. So I think the best thing is, I mean, the thing that I certainly wish that I had even more of a handle on before Gold Canyon burned the first time is paying attention sort of to the big picture of um, uh, on the landscape level, where are there, large amounts of um, trees and shrubs? Where is the shade? Where is there not shade? And then as much as you can pay attention to the smaller details. So if, especially just focusing on whatever it is that you are most aware of. So if you are a birder, what is the composition of bird species there then? Because that is guaranteed to change after the fire. What then does that tell you about other things that you can expect to see there? So because of the birds that are there, if it's a place with lots of trees and lots of foliage, that's definitely influencing the bird population. So which birds are dependent on that leafy green habitat that won't be there for a while after the fire. Then smaller things too. Pay attention to under these huge leafy green areas. What does the ground look like? What's growing there? Is it full of shrubs? Is it fairly open and not full of a lot of smaller vegetation? And so I think the biggest thing that I would have loved to have had more of a sort of careful big picture of at Cold Canyon before that first fire were these sort of larger landscape patterns and larger patterns in the composition of species. That's a fantastic question.
That's good. So paying attention to sort of what's making up the ecosystem right now and looking at the bigger picture on those things, but then also each of the details that make it up. How do you, speaking of which, one thing I've noticed and loved is the incredible diversity of different critters, and also sort of like some living on rocks, some sometimes the ecosystem being more on a hill. And how do you keep track of all of the diversity and where you encounter it when you're going through the canyon?
Yeah, so some of it is that it's not a huge place, and especially in the beginning, I was not exploring even all that much of it each time. I would the way that the reserve is structured, so it's a deep canyon. It's got pretty steep sides. And it's one of the reasons that people love hiking there, because there's a loop trail that goes sort of straight up to the top of a ridge, along the ridge, down again, and then back through the bottom of the canyon. And so it's kind of the perfect hiking trail. But that whole loop is only about 5 miles, so this isn't a huge area. And after the 2015 fire, especially, I would get there. And at first, the higher trails were closed for a little while for trail maintenance. So I stayed along the bottom of the canyon. I didn't get very far in each time because there was so much to see, so many things to draw, so many things to observe, that I probably made it. I made it about probably a mile in down the canyon, and then it was time to turn around and go home. So um, a lot of it was I got really, really familiar with that landscape, and so I just knew it well enough that when I was drawing things along it, I just remembered where things were. After probably nearly 5 years before the second fire, I started to think, maybe I should be recording these drawing locations a little more specifically. So I went and sort of categorized where I was so that I could make notations about where I did each drawing, and I ended up not using that all that much. So I think that, especially if you're covering a broader area, or if it really is important to you to remember locations, just making yourself, I mean, just drawing a map of the area that you're covering and dividing it into sections so you can make notes about what section you were in, it seemed like a good system, even if I didn't actually end up um, feeling like I needed to use it all that much.
That makes sense. I do something similar at my restoration site. I give little areas names based off of
Yeah.
either what it reminds me of, or if there's a special species that only seems to appear there. Um, we have this one plant called deerweed, and
Yeah.
whenever I see deerweed, it always makes me think of the Xerces butterfly, because that was the Xerces larval host. And so there's one area at my site where it grows a lot, and so I call it Xerces playground.
Oh, nice. That's great. See, that adds a whole another element of sort of fun and description.
But I
So
think that,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, but I think that that's great that you visited and know the area so well that you know where these things are, and that you could know that even before trying to come up with a system of categorizing. That just the dedication to going back to that place over and over again. To me, that is such a beautiful example of what Jack talks about when he says sustained compassionate attention. So
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to do that, so that we do just have this. That's interesting. Um, yeah, I can paint or talk on this one. So that we have this lens through which to interpret everything that we're hearing about climate change and what's going on. I think it helps. I mean, it helps in both ways. It helps both with, perhaps understanding in context that things that sound really terrible sometimes aren't as terrible as they sound, like fire. Um, but it also, on the other side, helps us understand and appreciate just how important, and in some ways how dire things are. And I think that's important too. I think it's really important to be in connection with what we stand to lose.
that's true. It's making it that much more personal, because we will protect what we care about. And we have to learn it first. We have to know it first to really truly deeply care about it, so that then we can see it changing. One thing, I remember listening to um, Marley's show about climate change, and you were one of the speakers on there. And one thing that you said that really struck me was that you felt it was important to stand witness to what was happening there. And so seeing and being there instead of just hearing about it later, and actually seeing the areas where this plant didn't make it, or you haven't seen that one again. I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And again, because it really helps us understand that nothing is as absolute as it might sound. There are always pockets of things that are, you know, surprising and hopeful.
I love that, because that's actually, somebody had just asked a question about how you avoid feeling despair,
Right.
that all the beauty will be gone if the planet keeps heating up. And it sounds like what you're saying is that you see it come back. You see some of it renew, some of it may not, but maybe it just changes, or maybe something different comes up. Like, had you said before that before the big fire, um, the one that was just before that, the whispering bells hadn't been seen for a long time, because the last
Yeah.
one had been 30 years earlier.
So yeah, so they the 2015 fire, it had been about 30 years before that. And yeah, and so that nearly 30 years ago was the last time that they'd been seen there. And so yeah, I mean it's just it I was just going to say in response to slightly before that, that there will be pockets of hope, and also understanding that things are going to change. Just about everything is going to change. And we may not personally like the way that it's changing. And I mean, absolutely, it's important to be in touch with and understand the things that we find a tragedy, personally, because it's things that we love. But when we're out there, there are other organisms that find other things appealing and are going to make use of the new habitats. I mean, habitats are changing, but it doesn't mean that there's no habitat. It means there's a different habitat. And I think it's being out there is the way to be able to hold both sides of that, that absolutely there are tragedies and we don't want to let go of that. But we also can um, look for and understand that things are continuing and that there are new beauties to be found as well.
I love that. Change doesn't mean necessarily stop. It
That's
keeps
right.
going.
That's right. Yeah. And it's so easy. I mean, fire is a great place to have this perspective because it's so easy to think everything just stopped. And then you have to wait for things to regrow back. But that there's this huge pause, and there's not a pause at all. This is wonderful. This is life. This is everything is ongoing. And to some animals, it's a wonderful new opportunity. To some animals, yeah, it's a habitat they can't live in for a while, and so they have to leave and they have to come back or they have to regrow. And for other animals, it's just business as usual. it's not it's not a big deal one way or the other.
Sarah Reed is making a comment in the chat of, she says, one of my aha moments in our local park is that the fire burned off brambles that had hid historic quarries and geographic features I had not seen in my lifetime. So sometimes fire uncovering new
Exactly.
things.
And the same thing it happened at Cold Canyon. There's I mean, it's not that people couldn't see them completely, but it revealed far more far more clearly some of the super interesting geological features there. There's been some interesting lifting and folding in the walls of the canyon, and certainly stuff that I hadn't been able to see or understand as well until I saw it. Seeing sort of past evidence of big landslides and rock falls that weren't as obvious. So yeah, sort of seeing the skeleton of the landscape underneath and appreciating that that's the only way you get that view is really important. So I'm glad she brought that up.
And maybe giving context to why the Ensatinas evolved a little bit differently from each other.
Right.
I think that wasn't that Stebbins's work that he was looking at the ensativas on either side.
Um, yeah, I'm sure you're right. I don't know. Um, yeah, I mean, I know I sort of know about the Ensatina speciation, the ring species stuff, but I can't say if that's is, yeah, no, I don't know.
It's wonderful seeing your skink come to life.
Yeah, so how are we doing on time? I'll move on to one more picture.
We're at 11:22, so I think if you
Oh,
want,
okay.
we can
Great.
do, yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
can do another
will. I
picture.
think I put a lot of water on that one, so I'm not going to turn the page. I'm going to grab a new piece of paper.
I'm looking to see if there's any other questions in the chat. I'm not seeing any at the moment. Um, so,
Great.
so when you're in the field, you were saying earlier that you don't use the brush pen as much in the field. What do you use instead?
I'm going to skip. So I'm going to actually sorry, I'm going to answer that question in a minute. I'm going to explain why I'm skipping this one. In the interest of time, I'm going to go to the final picture, which is of a woodpecker, but I just wanted to show this because it's an interesting thing to sort of consider, especially if you're studying a particular area. There are a couple of trail cameras installed at Stebbins, and I have gotten a huge amount out of watching some of the footage that's been posted from those trail cameras. And I love this as another way of sort of replicating field sketching. This great interaction of one spotted towhee coming in to chase out another spotted towhee, and there's a California towhee bathing in the water at the same time. And so I love when I was able to capture all on one screen, and it looks like it would be super fun to draw. I'm not going to do that one now because we don't have a ton of time. The last drawing I'm going to do is also from the trail camera, a different one, the other trail camera there, but sort of to continue on the theme of what comes in right after the fire because of all the really wonderful opportunities. So woodpeckers, some woodpeckers more than others, but quite a few of them are very drawn to two main things. One is all the insects that have come to take advantage of the burned wood. And two is the new snags that have been created with the dead and dying trees that open up new nesting cavities for woodpeckers. And so the black-backed woodpecker in the Sierra is pretty much completely dependent on fires for its habitat. The rest of the woodpeckers in California enjoy burned habitat to varying degrees, but at Cold Canyon we have the two that are the most numerous are Nuttall's woodpeckers and Acorn woodpeckers. And so I see lots of these. I got to watch lots of them right after the 2020 fire, especially just swooping. Swooping back and forth across the canyon, calling, and it's just this, especially right after the fire when there not that much had begun to regrow and things still felt kind of muted and dormant. Having these really lively woodpeckers zipping back and forth was just a great demonstration of sort of life and joy. So again, these are kind of blurry because they're off the trail camera, but it is nice to sort of appreciate having a little bit of time to enjoy their shape. And of course, they're such, woodpeckers in general are such joys to draw because they're so starkly patterned, and especially with a brush pen, that opens up all sorts of fun opportunities for really striking light and dark.
Most definitely. And that's awesome that there's that resource of the trail camera there too. Was it
Yes.
around from before the rag fire? Or
So I'm pretty sure, I mean, I know the ones that are there were installed after that fire, and I'm pretty sure there hadn't been any there before that. But what's cool is you can even see they were there during the 2020 fire, and you can see flames in the distance on one of them the night of the fire. And you can also see, not that long afterwards, you can see deer wandering across the the frame of the camera looking unconcerned, just going about their business. So it felt like that also gave a really interesting, intimate inside glimpse into what it was actually like for the wildlife there during and very near after the fire.
That is interesting because you'd imagine animals fleeing and panic everywhere, but instead hearing that they were kind of going about their business, not that stressed out. That's neat to know that.
Yeah, it's really great to be able to have that perspective. And since I saw that on the trail camera, I also had read that people had um, there's great documentation of, I'm pretty sure at Yellowstone, of elk, I think, just lounging, resting, not very far from the fire, um, just not um, just not enormously concerned because they obviously have much more of a sense than we do of, how fire behaves, when they would need to be concerned, and that it's not automatically something that you have to be terrified of and flee. Which, of course, is not to say that plenty of animals do absolutely get killed in fires and do absolutely have to flee, but that it's not the sort of universal trauma and reaction that it seems to us like it would sort of have to be.
I think it's important to think about that, to think about those kinds of nuances. It's too easy to just paint fire as just being this force of evil. And I think and knowing that there were long-term programs that were dedicated to complete fire suppression, when in fact the fires might have been more of an ecosystem feature. But when we have this idea of fire kind of demonized, then we don't understand it nearly as well because we're not truly learning about it. So I think it's important to have those perspectives challenged.
Yeah, it definitely is that fire is critical, that there are species that are suffering because they require fire and they aren't getting enough of it. Um, and understanding that one of the things that helps not so much prevent fires in the first place, but really impact their behavior once they are burning, is that land has burned previously at at a healthy ecosystem interval. There's even new great indication just from this last summer's fires, that burned Yosemite and outside of Yosemite, seeing how different the fire's behavior was inside the park, because Yosemite has had very progressive fire management policies since the 70s, and so fires that aren't threatening any human habitation or structures are allowed to burn, and they do controlled burning there. Um, and so it means that they've observed now in a bunch of fires, and then again this summer, that the patterns of fire inside the park and outside the park are uh, dramatically different. As soon as the fire hits the areas that have been maintained with fire, it burns in a much more mosaic pattern. So it burns intensely in one area and then very nearby, not as intensely, and leaves areas unburned. And so it's that mix of intense and not burning at all, and just as many different patterns of burning that is necessary for a healthy ecosystem. We need the fire, but we need it to burn in a bunch of different ways, so that because different species need different kinds of burning, and also because we need to maintain um, reservoirs of refuge too from fire. And so even now, with drought having changed how likely we are to have fire, and what how widespread that fire, how far that fire is likely to spread once it starts, even with all of that, if we are allowing landscapes to have fire in them, it still makes a huge difference in what actually happens in that fire. And so I think that's also a really hopeful thing that I have learned out of this, which is fire is critical. But of course, after that 2020 fire, that's now a whole lot more fire than this ecosystem was equipped to handle. But understanding that there are still, even with climate change, even with drought, um, even with all sorts of things changing what happens with fire, we still have the power to influence what happens once those fires start burning. And that is that is a really good thing, because there are many things about climate change where the not the solution necessarily, but at least some help for the problem is so clear.
Most definitely. And I think that that's sorry, I just want to repeat the point that you just said about how fire burns in a diversity of different ways. That is, I think, so important to note, and that we need those different ways. Nature needs those different ways of having the fire burn, because different parts of nature will have the different needs. It'll do different things to the landscape depending on how it burns.
Yeah, and it's important also, it's sort of helpful to know, I mean, we think, well, climate change is making fires burn more intensely, so hotter. Um, and understanding that, and it sounding like that's always a bad thing. That's not always a bad thing. There's a lot of species and a lot of habitats that need intense fire. They evolved with usually less frequent but very intense fire, and that's what some species need. And so it's not that we don't want the intensity; it's that we don't want high intensity over an incredibly large area. We want that in smaller patches interspersed with other forms of burning too. But it does help. Everyone talks about, hotter fires, more intense fires, and that by itself is not is not a bad thing, and it's nice to know that.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is wonderful. It's wonderful just getting to watch how you capture the ecosystem and how you put the ecosystem together on your pages. Each of the elements, you can picture each of them being part of the same story of this canyon when you see them. And then also hearing your observations about fire and your understanding of it is just wonderful to listen to.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to share all of these things that I learned, because I think they're so important for people to hear and to think about.
Absolutely. And so what are maybe I don't know if this is an obvious question, but I figure out might as well ask, what are
Mhm.
some of the things that we can do once the fires do start burning?
So yeah, so one thing is, like I said with Yosemite, the more we can change our policy to allow fires that are, and I mean, there has certainly been progress made on this, but it is important to let wildland fires burn that aren't threatening anything human. And controlled burning is important. Um, and us living intelligently in areas that are likely to burn. And of course, the areas that are likely to burn are growing all the time. So this impacts more and more of us all the time. But we know a lot about how to build houses safely. That nothing is completely safe, but we know a lot about how to make houses a whole lot more resistant to fire. And so ensuring that we do that, ensuring that we're smart about how we keep the space around our home and where we build homes. Those are all definitely not trivial ways of dealing with fire. And then, I mean, so many times we absolutely do have to devote resources to helping people. So just being really smart about, you know, letting the things that can burn burn, so that when we do need to do firefighting efforts to save towns and people's homes and people themselves, that's where our resources are going. But again, the larger shift of understanding that fire does not need to be our enemy, that fire is something that humans know how to live with as an ecological partner, and understanding that fire takes care of a lot of things in the ecosystem that we don't even know about yet. There's so many things that we know about and it's clear that there are so many other things that it does that we don't know about, things that we now try to replicate through doing restoration projects in out in the landscape. We are very clumsy. Fire can take care of a lot of things that we just don't know because we don't have the full picture. So understanding that fire is our potential partner in helping to preserve what we can in California, and allowing it to do its thing while still keeping it from harming things that of course we can't let it harm, are really important goals. Really, really difficult goals, but really important goals.
Thank you so much. This
Yeah.
is wonderful. Um, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about or to share about your work?
Yeah. So I have, been blown away by everything that I have learned and gained by studying fire. But I do want to come back to the reason that I started this project in the first place was not because of fire. I didn't start this because I had decided that fire was something I was going to study. I started this because I thought it was really, really important to be grounded in a specific place and to know it really well and to change with it, let it change me over time as it changes. And so that is the thing that I want the very most to share with people, is just how much you can learn about your place in the world, about what's happening in the rest of the world, by knowing one particular place really well, because they're by getting even just the tiniest glimpse into what's going on in the ecosystem and in all the interactions that happen in that one place, it really gives you a sense of awe and amazement at all the things that you still don't know about that place and what that must mean for the rest of the world, and how amazing the rest of the world is, and how, first off, how important it is to do everything we can to preserve what's here, but also to understand that life is always change. It has always been change. And yeah, the changes now are terrifying and they're big, and we definitely consider them tragedies, but life is always change. And we are always part of that, whether we know it or not. And so making yourself consciously aware of how that change is happening and how you are a part of it can have just untold benefits for your life and understanding of the world.
Absolutely. I love what you said about letting the place itself change you,
Yeah.
not just watching how the place changes, but letting it affect you. Um, and I think that that's something that a lot of us as nature journalers, over time, we get to learn, is that we're not just nature observers. We're letting nature itself influence us,
Yes.
and change us for the better
Yeah.
and help us grow. Um, there's somebody here. Let me see. Okay, I found you, Sarah. Sarah Reed lives over in Sonoma County and has been through some of the fires in there. And so
Mhm.
she said that she wanted to make a comment in support
Oh,
of you.
great.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Uvea. Robin, I just want to tell you how much I'm just loving your book. I'm almost done reading it, and it's so inspired me. And I just love the whole way the book is organized and how you explain things. And the thing that I really wanted to say right now is how important I feel like this kind of work that you've done and presented in print for people is so important, because so many times we get buried by scientific journals or scientific research, and a lot of us either can't read it because we don't have the expertise and all the knowledge of all the terminology or the statistical able to read statistics and all that, but to see it in a way that anybody really could read your book and get a sense of Cold Canyon, but also a sense of the land and what these processes are in a way that we can relate to. And I think that's one of the most important things about a book like yours, is to explain all this in observations in a way that anybody can understand it. And be able to have access to it too. I've been trying to find some information about one of our local fires in a specific area of this park, and it's like the agencies almost secret away the information, and it's like, oh, darn it, I want to learn this about this kind of the vegetation map or whatever. And it's almost like it's all secreted away unless you have the right contacts. And that's kind of frustrating too. But having it explained in such a wonderful, personable way that anybody can understand, I think is just so incredibly valuable. And thank you so much for being such an inspiration to me, for possibly launching into a similar project in my own
Fantastic.
way, for the a nun's fire footprint, and a
Yeah.
very special place to me.
Yeah.
And
Good.
I also, yesterday I went out on a same park, different trail that I'm extremely familiar with, that burned in the glass fire. And having
Mm.
just been reading about lichens, and the section in
Mm.
your book about lichens, and about how different kinds of trees sprout from different places, it gave me a totally different perspective on this place that I've been to hundreds and hundreds of times. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, look at that, and just, so thank you.
You're welcome. Well, so first, I just want to say, good. I'm so glad that is your experience of the book, because that was very much what I was hoping to achieve. So I'm really, really glad to hear that. And then the other thing is, to you, and then to anyone else on the call too, thinking about embarking on anything like this, anytime you want to just chat about the process, about planning things, about how it's going, about any of it, I am always you know happy to, excited to talk to people about really about anything to do with nature journaling and nature, but especially about, following ecological change. So no one should hesitate to reach out to me if you, truly, even if you don't even know what your what your thoughts all are and you just want to chat about it, I'm always available.
Thank you.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
and specifically to you, Sarah, if you want to chat, I would love to hear about how things are going too, because I would absolutely personally benefit from hearing about your fire area and your experience of it, and what you know and what you are thinking about. So
Thank you. Thank you
please
so
do
much.
reach out.
I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up and smiles when I look at the gallery view. So I think
Yeah,
that
I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see the gallery view too. There we go. Much better.
I think that there are absolutely a lot of people who are relating and who are also thinking that yes, they want to embark on similar things. And I think all of us here are so inspired by your work. I know I'm, like I already said, I know I'm going to be asking you for advice too.
Yes, please do. I mean, truly, anyone who has any any questions or thoughts or wants advice or anything, I would love for as many people to be doing this sort of thing as possible. So anything I can do to encourage it, please let me know.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. And I want to check, did anybody else have any questions? You can either write them in the chat or use the raise hand feature. But I wanted to make sure that I'm not missing anybody. I'm not seeing anybody. Oh, Dee. Okay, here you go, Dee. I will ask you to unmute and I'm going to add you into the spotlight.
She's probably already said this because I'm a little bit late, but where is Cold Canyon and what was the other name that you referred to it?
Yeah, so its full name is Stebbins Cold Canyon Reserve, and it is it's part of the University of California Natural Reserve System, and it is in the sort of eastern side of the Coast Ranges, right by, I don't know where you're from.
I'm Santa
right
Cruz. I'm
Oh,
at
okay.
Santa Cruz.
Yeah, so I live in Davis, and it's pretty much straight west of Davis into the hills. So it's near Lake Berryessa. I don't know if that means anything. But yeah, so it's sort of just up into the Coast Range from the Central Valley.
Okay, and it's
the level of the Bay
Stebbins,
Area.
Stebbins.
Yes.
I'm inspired to maybe do a day trip.
Yes. Yes, I recommend waiting and not doing it until the temperatures go down a little bit, because especially the beautiful ridge part of the hike, it's always exposed, but especially after a recent fire, there's not
Any
shade to
shade.
speak of getting up there, and it's a hot summer hike. So I recommend fall, winter, spring are all wonderful places to go, and it's a great place to hike.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Dee. And then were there any other questions or thoughts that anyone wanted to share? I'm not seeing any. So again, thank you so much for being here with us today and for allowing us to ask questions and see your process and hear about the magic of this place that you've been watching out for 5 years now and continuing to visit, I take. Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely. I am certainly planning on planning on following it indefinitely because like someone's question about if there's an area you suspect is going to burn. I mean, the areas around it burn a lot. I mean, I watched over those 5 years between the two fires, I watched all the areas around it burn and figured it was probably not going to be that long. And I'm sure it will be burning again before 30 years have passed. So, but regardless, having started this, I do not plan to stop.
That makes us really happy to hear that, especially because I'm imagining once you go to an area over and over again, you feel a sense of home there.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd been familiar with it. I liked hiking there before, but it's a completely different feeling when you have paid such close attention to the place.
Exactly. That's the place is part of you and you're part of that place.
Yes, exactly. Right. And that's the other thing. I mean, letting a place change you and understanding that your presence there is changing it too, that you have inserted yourself into its story, its its evolution as well, and that's important too.
Yes, reminding to put ourselves in there or to acknowledge that we are part of this in our nature journals, in what we do there. I think that's hugely important. Thank you. Did you have any other closing thoughts that you wanted to share? Or
No, just thank you so much for your excellent facilitation, Eva. I really appreciate it.
I'm so honored just to get to be here with you. So thank you for letting us all be here with you. And yeah, sorry, I'm a huge fangirl.
Well, I am a fan of your work as well, so it is mutual. And I am very, very grateful to everyone for coming and being part of a wonderful discussion.
Also, for anybody who's attending Wild Wonder, Robin, like we mentioned, will be one of the teachers. So if you want to learn more and geek out about how Robin does shadow work, that's going to be her workshop. So hope that you join us. Hope that folks will look for Robin's book. I put the link into the chat. I'll put it one more time just so folks have access to that. Sorry, I have to scroll up a little bit to find where I last posted it. But oh yeah, here it is. So yeah, I really hope that folks will check that out. Continue to follow Robin. Also, you have an Instagram for Anthropocene Sketchbook.
Yes.
Yep, which I follow. But I'm going to put that in there too, so that folks can find you on Instagram.
Yes, and there was one question about leading a hike at Cold Canyon. I am hoping to do some of that, and hopefully in the near-ish future. So my recommendation, if you're interested in that sort of thing, is to follow my Instagram for right now. I don't have a newsletter or anything like that. I probably should start one, but I don't. But I definitely will announce things on my Instagram account, probably my website too. But the Instagram account is probably the best way if you are on Instagram to follow. But if you are, so my email address is on my website. Oh, here, why don't I put my email address in here, since I also encouraged people to reach out to me. Just let me know if you want to be included in information about events and hikes and things like that, because I can let people know individually too, if you're not on Instagram especially. Make sure I typed that right. Okay, yeah, so I just put my email in there, and so definitely feel free to use that to just ask me questions or to talk to me about ecosystem type projects, or if you're interested in hikes or workshops or things like that.
I will be doing that.
Excellent. Yes, and maybe I will get it together to have a very, very sporadic newsletter.
We're not going anywhere, so whenever you do, we'll be waiting.
Excellent.
Thank you so very much, and thank you to Robin Lee Carlson. Even though Jack departed, thank you to him. Thank you to everybody who is here, who follows this topic, and who cares about being able to do this kind of work. Sustained attention, noticing the changes, and how this affects our ecosystems in the future and our stewardship work. So thank you to all of you here, and thank you again to Robin, and we'll see you all again hopefully soon, or out in the field. Thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful day.